Mike, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
No, I haven't started speaking yet. You're
Oh, okay.
okay. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for that, Stefan. That was really interesting. I was scribbling down notes and thinking I should have mentioned that as well in my presentation. But it leads in quite nicely, I think. What I want to do now is I guess several things. Some of this is well, a lot of this is very personal for me because I've been vegan 38 years now. I turned vegan when I was let's think to get the maths right, when I was 19 and I was gone to Loughborough University as a recent vegetarian, and I ended up sharing an apartment, that's a very luxurious word, a flat at Loughborough University with another PE student, or jock as we were called, and he was an international junior sprinter, 200 meters, 400 meters, and he had recently turned vegan as well. And this got me thinking about the vegan diet as a diet for athletes. And so between us, I think we're probably the only two people. We thought we were the only two people at Loughborough University in the 80s, which anyone who knows Loughborough is quite a conservative university, let's say that, with a small C, full of economic students. Not that I've got anything against economic students, of course, and also engineers, but primarily a sports and exercise physiology university. And one of the things that I then started exploring was, apart from the health benefits, which I was convinced of, was the environmental and the ethical reasons for looking at a vegan diet as opposed to a vegetarian one. And it brought to mind several books which were available back then in the 70s, which a few of you may well remember. A Diet for a Small Planet by Francis Moore Lappe, 1971. Small is Beautiful by Schumacher, 1973. The title for that seems incredibly pertinent today. So the subtitle for the Small and Beautiful book was A Study of Economics as if People Mattered. Now, how strong a message is that? And I think, so what are we now, 30, 40 years plus later, that book, if anyone went back to read it, were so many of the things that people like Francis Moore Lappe and Schumacher were talking about have actually become quite mainstream now. And I guess they've been brought totally up to date by my most recent book that I've read by Dr. Greger. Some of you may know that he's one of the most respected vegan nutritional doctors in America, incredibly research and evidence based. And his most recent book, which he just brought out last year, How to Survive a Pandemic, is well worth a read if anyone is interested in the true costs of a factory-based, meat and dairy-heavy diet on world economies. Then I'd recommend that you read that book. And it clearly shows that the United Nations, the World Health Organization, for decades now have been saying that the number one risk to the world economy is a pandemic, and it's likely, and they didn't even think that it was going to be a COVID type virus. Their best bet is that it's still going to be an avian or a pig-based virus that's going to jump across. And if that happens, their predictions are that it would be a lot worse than the last year that we've been through. So I think that's a classic example of how, the key thing to me is this is all about short-term versus long-term. And it may be that there are some short-term economics which show that the meat and dairy industry is sustainable. But if we take into account the true cost of that meat and dairy industry, which, by the way, is still heavily subsidized in some parts of the world in terms of health, and the NHS costs and the health costs, which Stefan's alluded to. But imagine if we started counting in the cost of the current pandemic and potential future pandemics, which are quite likely to happen over the last 20 or 30 years. That, to my mind, would be, I'm not an economist, that would be, to my mind, would be taking into account true life costs of this sort of food production. But anyway, that's just an introduction. I'm here to talk about pizzas, which are hopefully a little bit more fun. And it may seem a little bit ironic to you that I'm talking about a pizza business when we're talking about what is, undeniably in my experience or personal experience and the research that I've done and increasing research coming out is the most natural and the healthiest diet for human beings to eat. And it was interesting, that discussion about, well, what is a standard vegan diet? And yes, I'm a vegan, but I don't call my diet a vegan diet. My diet is a plant-based whole foods diet. Now, if we start using that terminology, being a vegan is not just about what you eat, as I'm sure you know. It's also about a lot of other aspects, if you like. But you can get plenty of people that live on a plant-based whole foods diet that aren't necessarily vegan. And I think that's the key to me. Yes, plant-based, but more importantly, it's about moving people towards much more of a whole foods, less processed diet. That's what we need to focus on from a health and an environmental and ethical point of view. So, One Planet Pizza. This is myself, and I have to point out that's my son. Some people don't think that we're sons; we think we're more like brothers. But I'm quite happy to admit that I'm the older one on the right one there. We founded the business in 2016, and we're now producing up to 4,000 plant-based pizzas per week from our purpose-built production unit in Norwich. And it's taken us quite a long time, but we're now available in Ocado, Whole Food stores down in London, and in over 500 independent whole food shops or health food shops across the UK. And that's been an important part of our ethos and our growth strategy, in that a lot of food brands now come out and straight away want to go for that supermarket listing in Asda or Tesco's. But we really wanted to grow the business organically, and we wanted to put our product into independent health stores and support them and work with them. And yes, I mean, that was certainly 5 years ago. That was where our core market, to a certain extent, was going to be shopping. And I guess we can sum up the vision, mission, the ethos of the company in 3 words. It's about pizzas with purpose. So we're about taking one of the most popular fast foods in the world and using it as a vehicle of change. And hopefully my presentation will explain, how we aim to do that, because it's not obviously apparent. So, for example, this is our vision. So we want to become the #1 frozen vegan pizza brand in the UK and Europe in the next 3 years. The frozen pizza market is worth £3 billion across Europe. And so if we could just get a tiny percentage of that, we have a multi-million-pound business that can make a real difference in encouraging people to eat less meat and dairy, because so many people are eating pizzas, and therefore so many people are eating meat and dairy as a result of that. In terms of the environment, we've calculated our pizzas have 54% lower carbon footprint than standard pizzas. And that's just because our cheese isn't dairy-based, it's coconut-based. And obviously, if we use, predominantly it's plants that we use. If we use faux meats or fake meats, then they used to be soy-based, but in our sector, it's now moved a lot more towards being pea-based. That's where a lot of the fake meats are moving. In terms of our packaging, we've worked really hard to make sure that we're pretty much the only pizza we know that's zero to landfill. So our boxes are made from recycled material and totally recyclable, and our cling film is recyclable as well. And we're also looking at things of reusing stuff as opposed to recycling. We've got quite a healthy part of our business is direct to consumer, so we're sending out frozen pizzas, and we're just trialing upcycled denim as our insulation material. So we're always looking for different ways in which we can, improve that environmental footprint. And the palm oil thing is really interesting. Initially, when we first launched for the first 2 or 3 years, we had a tiny amount. One of our products had some palm oil in from a fully certified sustainable source. But it was incredible, how much flack we got. If you're selling pizzas or any product to vegans, then you really have to be very careful and be whiter than white, and be prepared to back up every decision, because they can be quite a critical audience. And even though we felt our stance on the use of the palm oil we use was reasonable, in the end we managed to find a good alternative. So we just decided to go 100% palm oil free. And then I guess we got the health element. It's really interesting because one of the main reasons I wouldn't be vegan if I didn't feel healthier on it, and if I didn't believe it was the most natural diet for humans to eat. Regardless of what I think about the environment or the abuse of animals, for me, it's got to be natural and it's got to be healthy. That's the number one thing. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. What's the point in being vegan and not having a plant-based whole food diet if you end up going to the doctors and being told that you have to eat some cheese or meat? We've got to make sure that this is sustainable both from an environmental point of view, but also from our individual health. So look at the bottom point there. On average, our pizzas have at least 50% salt and sugar compared to leading meat and dairy pizzas. I haven't got it on there, but we're also 40% lower in saturated fat. And that's even when we changed our cheese from soy-based to coconut-based. So pretty much all cheeses, vegan cheeses now, apart from the expensive nut-based ones, are based on coconut. And that's pushed up the saturated fat levels of vegan cheeses. But even with that, we're still 40% less on average. The way we worked this out, we took our 4 pizzas, which are very much the common ones: 3 cheese margherita, Hawaiian, fungi feast, and med veg. We found typical meat and dairy options of those that are produced by Goodfellas, Chicago Town, Dr. Optica, etc., compared to nutritionals. And we came up incredibly. That salt and sugar figure really blew my mind, because we think our pizzas are incredibly tasty, but going back to what Stefan was saying about that taste curve, one of our challenges is getting people to enjoy a pizza and think it's as tasty as a pizza that's got 50% more salt and sugar in it. So there is definitely something that it's a palate adjustment, which we need to be getting used to. We're recently going more and more into Eurozone, into mainland Europe. And one of the things that we've been warned is that the salt consumption levels in certain countries in Europe and the targets that they've been given by the governments are higher than UK. So whilst the amount of salt in processed products like pizzas has come down in the UK, it hasn't come down as much, and the government guidelines, surprisingly, in some European countries are actually higher. So one of the problems we've got when we take our pizzas over to Germany, for example, is people just say, well, it's not tasty. And in essence, that comes down to the salt, because that's one of the key drivers from a taste point of view. And then the final thing on health is that we took this rather novel approach towards omega-3, which can be a bit of an issue for people on a plant-based diet. So we've enriched our bases with flaxseed, and we put chia seeds as a thickener into our tomato sauce. So we're the only pizza in the world that can claim to be a source of omega-3. I'm incredibly proud about that. Do our customers care? I don't think so, because all of the research that we've done shows that the fact that our pizzas are healthier is right down on the list of why they choose our pizzas. Why do they choose them? Number 1 is about taste. Number 2 is about convenience. Number 3 is that they're plant-based. And then it's only after that we then start getting down to environmental factors. And health is actually one of the least important, unfortunately, from my point of view. Okay, a little bit about branding and market positioning, because I think this is really interesting. The last year or two have seen a real change, a real flux in this plant-based sector. Our target audience was people that were vegan or predominantly vegan, and they were buying their stuff through independent health stores or perhaps Ocado. But everyone's seen the change in the multiples in the supermarkets and what's happening there. So one of the things that we've done in the last few months is repositioned, rebranded. So these are our new boxes on the right here. And it's focusing less on the health, more about the environmental, because the research shows that the main reason now that people are eating less meat and dairy is actually environmental, not health, which is a bit of a swap. When I first turned vegan, pretty much all the vegans I knew were hunt sabs or breaking into laboratories at Oxford or Cambridge and releasing bunny rabbits. That was the main drive for being vegan in those days. And we didn't even know the term plant-based. But these days, they're a real minority, and most people are now reducing. In fact, the number of people that are turning vegan is pretty much stabilized. What's increasing is the number of people that are reducing, their meat and dairy consumption, not cutting it out totally. Okay, so our new customers are very much now reducers. I hate some of these terms, but they're reducers, flexitarians, the more conscious consumers. 1 in 3 UK households are now regularly consuming meat-free meals and opting for plant-based alternatives. Particular growth in younger generations, but that's a change, and it's a big change this year. That this drive has really moved out of younger generations, millennials, particularly in metropolitan areas. It's definitely spread out, and it's less metropolitan, and it's moving more into the middle and older ages in terms of people wanting to make a difference with their diet. And they're people that are concerned about climate change. We've got all of these different things happening now. Meatless Mondays, which is driven by Paul McCartney still. Veganuary, I'm not sure you're all aware of now. So there's a lot of sort of reducing and replacing going on, and really, these people, part of their drive is that that they are attracted to a brand that perhaps puts purpose over profit. However, one of the key things I always say to new plant-based businesses is, at the end, at some stage, you've got to become profitable, because otherwise it's not sustainable. And we want sustainable plant-based businesses. Just a little bit more about the sustainability. I've talked about most of this. 85% made with recycled materials. We use 20% less packaging, so we're trying to reduce our packaging in total. And I've mentioned about the plant oil. Just a little bit of interest. I know this is mainly about economics, but from a marketing point of view, we've had to up myself and Joe's presence on the boxes, because the research showed that one of the key reasons people loved our brand was the family story. And if we're going to stand any chance against the larger competitors that are moving to the marketplace, one of the things that we often talk about is being the Ben & Jerry's of the frozen pizza world. It's a classic example from a marketing point of view, where people will buy a product that perhaps is £1, £1.50 more expensive than a supermarket own brand. Why do they do that? Well, they do it principally because of the brand and the story that's behind the actual product. And this is a good example of where we're moving to, I guess, moving towards taste and away from health. We've teamed up with, you see this cheese here, Applewood vegan cheese. Interestingly, Applewood, probably you all know, Applewood and Mexicana are dairy cheeses made by Northland, who are one of the biggest cheese manufacturers in Europe, dairy cheese. I guess this is a sign of the times, and one of the things that we always need to think about from an ethical point of view, that we're now, our cheese is provided by a dairy company, a massive, not massive, but a medium-sized dairy producer, who are now doing a very, very good, one of the best vegan cheeses out there. So we've decided to team up with them in terms of the cheese, and we're also teaming up with other companies. So one of the ways that we manage to survive and compete is by doing a lot of collaborations or mush-ups, as we call them, working with other brands like Norsewood, like Meatless Farm. We're just working with Leon at the moment on their Love Burger, their vegan burger. So we really have to work quite hard and quite often ride along on the tails of bigger companies in order to be able to survive in the marketplace. Just picked this up today, actually, so I thought I'd pop it in, just building on some of the stuff that Stefan was talking about. Google Trends. There's only one date like this. This date line is current day, quite up to date. I think it's January this year. Goes back down here to 2015, when things really started changing. And it's interesting to see that vegetarian has pretty much gone along as it was. Meat, in terms of Google Trends, has continued to increase. So actually, people don't. Quite surprised. Meat consumption across the world is actually still increasing significantly, and it's pretty stagnant in Western, more developed countries, but the growth is in South America and in Asia. That's where meat consumption. And I guess it's I quite often think the analogy is really thinking about tobacco, some alcohol brands. even formula milk. Companies moving away from certain countries, certain continents as their sales decline, and moving to other continents and selling the same products, which quite often in Europe or America are declining. So yeah, the big growth in meat, particularly pork and white meat, is in China and Southeast Asia, where consumption's really gone up. A few things here from though, isn't it interesting that the top vegan countries now are Austria, Germany, France, Switzerland, and UK, which was up there as the #1 growth in terms of vegan and plant-based diets, has now fallen them behind a little bit. Israel is a big market. Israel has the highest percentage of vegans in the world as a country. But yeah, I think the particular growth, and for us example, Germany is a key target market. So we're talking to distributors in Germany now. That's where one of the fastest growth areas is. And just coming towards the end now. So in terms of the marketplace, some figures which pick up on what Stefan was talking about, how this is growing, but really focusing on food sales. So 5 times faster growth of plant-based foods versus total food sales. 1,400% growth in interest in plant-based diets in just 5 years. A figure that I always remember is that the number of people describing themselves as vegans has gone up 300% in the last decade. I made a note in 1986. They couldn't calculate what percentage of the population were vegan because there wasn't any research to do it. But I estimated that it was 0.01% probably back there. It's still a small percentage. And one of the things that I always say to our management team is that it's very easy when you're working in this environment, and when you're dealing mainly with people who are quite conscious and aware of their diet and are open towards a plant-based diet, you start to think that this is the norm. But it's not really, because I run another business in a totally different sector. And if I go to a business meeting, or over a year ago when I used to go to business meetings and conferences, I would still be pretty much the only vegan there. Perhaps I used to be the only one in 200. Now there may be 2 of us in 200. So the percentages of people vegan is still very tiny. But 80%, 86% of plant-based consumers are not vegan. They're flexitarian, and there you can see 20 million people now in the UK would identify them as this pretty awful flexitarian term. So for plant-based options to survive, we need to taste out this world, and this is a really interesting one here that we've got to think about all the time. So we have what we call foundation drivers: taste, price, convenience, and these satisfy immediate needs. But the evolving drivers satisfy what we call secondary aspirational needs: environmental impact, health, and animal welfare. And it's a bit like any hierarchy that you look at. You really need to be ticking the box in the foundational drivers before you move on to the evolving drivers. So it doesn't matter how great our pizzas are for the environment and for your health and animal welfare if we can't tick the box on taste, price, and convenience. People just won't move up to those evolving drivers. So we need to keep that in mind all the time. This just reiterates that, and just quite often quite nice to think about this, the difference between head and heart. So when we go shopping, quite often it's about taste, convenience, price, appearance, aroma, choice, and texture. That's what's going on in our head. Whereas for a significant percentage of shoppers now, they also have this conflicting, often heart type emotions, thinking, well, I need to be doing something about the environment. Has it got palm oil? What's the packaging? What sort of a business in it, and what's their attitude towards animal welfare? So just to finish off, the key challenges facing what we call ourselves a challenger brand, because we're challenging the norm. We're trying to change and disrupt the market. The key challenges to us are the same basics from any business, really: cost margins and economies of scale. So over the last year, we've had 3 key competitors coming into our marketplace. First of all, larger plant-based brands diversifying into our sector. So for example, most of you may know Fry's, South African company, make everything in South Africa, freeze it, ship it all over the world. very strong on sausages and burgers and things like this. Brought out a pizza which we're now shipping into the UK from South Africa, which is a direct competitor of ours. Multi-million-pound international business. Secondly, the much larger meat and dairy brands developing plant-based options. So, for example, in the pizza world, we've got a very cheap falafel pizza. Who would make a falafel pizza? Let me ask that question. Only a company that doesn't understand the vegan market. They must have obviously thought, well, we need to do a pizza. What do vegans eat? Falafel. We'll put falafel on pizza. So Goodfellas have got a very cheap or budget pizza, which is available in pretty much all supermarkets. Chicago Town have just launched a vegan stuffed crust pizza. So that, these are big competitors of ours at the moment, currently half our price. And then finally, the multiples are pretty much all developing their own brand pizzas. So Sainsbury's, Asda, Tesco's 2 years ago didn't have their own brand pizza. They've now got their own brand plant-based pizzas. So what do we do? Well, we've got to try and compete on values, but not solely on price. E.g., as I said, the Ben & Jerry's of the world, we're just going through a big NPD reshuffle, trying to retool our pizzas, remodel them, I guess, to see how we can come up with a pizza, reduce the price of our pizzas from £5 to £5.50 down to £3.99 to £4.50, because we've worked out that people may well pay £1 or £1.50 more for our pizzas, but they're not going to pay double the price of a cheaper one. So that's a key challenge from us. Secondly, very interesting about investment for plant-based businesses. Very well-known example is Oatly's. So Oatly's recently took investment from Blackstone Investment, and you may have seen there was a big upset on social media about this, with a lot of people who love the Oatly brand not being happy that they took investment from a massive investment fund that was linked or is linked to Trump, was linked to some pretty dodgy oil and gas and shale stuff in the Arctic, also linked to deforestation of the Amazon. You couldn't have picked a company with dodgier credentials for a very out there and a very ethical company like Oatly. And they really took a hammering on that on social media from a lot of their followers. But ultimately, has it affected their market share? It doesn't look like that. Even if a small percentage of hardcore vegans boycotted Oatly and moved to another brand, the massive money that they're now funding that they've now got access to is going to allow them to grow exponentially compared to what they could have done before. And recently, an American company who produce excellent cheese and mayo called Follow Your Heart, 25-year family business, multi-million-pound international, and have just sold out to Danone. And Danone are obviously a yogurt and dairy company. And this is a big question mark over ethical plant-based businesses. How do we get our money? How do we attain our growth? And if we want to exit, how does that happen? And I guess ultimately, coming back to some of the things that Stefan was saying, if the food paradigm is focused so much on price, then can quality, sustainability, and the ethical factor ever become mainstream in a capital society? I think at the moment, a lot of the unhealthy food is subsidized in one way or another, either directly or because we're not taking into account the medium-term or long-term costs of eating meat, eating dairy, or in some cases eating plant-based foods, but ones which have been produced and causing a lot of deforestation, like palm oil, or things like avocados being grown in absolutely the wrong country, so that we have a massive use of water or heating to grow fruit and vegetables where perhaps they shouldn't be grown. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.